Clara Whitmore hadn't cried since the day they put her husband in the ground. Not once. She'd stood at that grave with 8-year-old Lucy pressed against her side, and she'd made herself a promise. Nobody was going to take what James died building. Not the drought, not the bank, and certainly not Victor Hale. She just never expected the man who'd help her keep that promise to show up half dead on her porch, covered in trail dust, with a little girl clinging to the back of his coat. If this story moves you, subscribe to our channel, follow every part to the end, and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see just how far this story travels. The knock came just before sundown. Clara heard it from the kitchen, where she was scrubbing the cast iron skillet so hard her knuckles had gone white. She'd been doing that a lot lately. Scrubbing things that were already clean, mending fences that didn't need mending, keeping her hands moving so her mind couldn't settle long enough to be afraid. She set the skillet down, wiped her hands on her apron, picked up the Winchester that leaned against the wall beside the back door. She'd learned to do that after what happened to the Grayson place 2 weeks ago. Woke up to smoke on the horizon, and by the time anybody rode out, there was nothing left but ash and a family standing in their nightclothes with nowhere to go. "Mama?" Lucy called from the back room. "Stay put." Clara moved through the front of the cabin, stepped to the side of the door the way James had taught her. Never stand square in a door frame. She pulled the curtain edge back with 2 fingers and looked out. A man stood on her porch. Tall, lean in the way men get when they haven't eaten regular in too long. His coat was dark with trail dust, one sleeve torn at the shoulder, and he held his hat in both hands in front of him. The kind of gesture that said he was trying to look harmless. His horse was tied to the post, a brown quarter horse that looked about as worn out as its rider. And behind him, pressed against his left leg with both small fists bunched in the fabric of his coat, was a little girl. Clara lowered the rifle, raised it again. Then she opened the door. "State your business," she said. She kept the barrel pointed at the boards between his boots, not at him, but close enough. The man didn't flinch. He looked at the rifle, then up at her face, and something in his expression shifted. Not fear, but a kind of recognition, like he'd been on the receiving end of a gun enough times that it no longer surprised him. "Name's Ethan Callahan, ma'am." His voice was low and unhurried, like a man accustomed to choosing his words careful. "I was told in town you might be looking for a hired hand. Ranch work. I'm good with horses, fences, cattle. I don't drink on the job, and I don't cause trouble." He paused. "I just need work." Clara looked at the girl. The child stared back at her with enormous, dark eyes. 8 years old, maybe 9. Her dress was too small, and her hair was a tangled mess. But she stood straight-backed despite it, chin lifted just slightly. Like pride was the one thing she hadn't let the road take from her. "Who's the girl?" Clara said. "My daughter, Rose." Ethan glanced down at her. "She goes where I go." "Her mother?" A muscle moved in his jaw. "Gone." Clara studied him for a long moment. The sun was dropping fast behind the ridge, and the evening air had teeth in it, even in summer. And she thought about the Grayson family standing in the road with nothing. And she thought about how many fences she'd put off fixing, because there simply weren't enough hours, and she only had 2 hands. "You eaten today?" she said. "Yesterday." She stepped back from the doorway. "Come in then, both of you." Lucy appeared in the kitchen doorway the second Rose stepped inside. The 2 girls looked at each other the way children do, direct, assessing, without any of the social pretense adults put over their suspicion. "I'm Lucy," her daughter said. "Rose," the other girl said. "How old are you?" 9. "I'm 8, but I can rope better than most boys in town." Rose almost smiled. Almost. Clara set 2 bowls of beef stew on the table without asking if they were hungry. because that question felt cruel, given the answer was obvious. She watched Ethan Callahan settle into the chair across from her. He moved carefully, she noticed. Not the careful of a man who was weak, the careful of a man managing something, favoring his right side slightly. "You're hurt," she said. "It's nothing." "It's a something, or you wouldn't be walking like that." He met her eyes. "Took a fall 2 days back. Cracked a rib, I think. I've had worse." "I imagine you have." Clara sat down across from him and folded her hands on the table. "Where are you coming from, Mr. Callahan?" "South. Wyoming territory most recently." "And before that?" He picked up his spoon and ate a mouthful of stew before answering. "Here and there. I've covered a lot of ground." "What kind of work?" "Ranch work, some law keeping years back." He said it plainly, without pride or apology. "I've been moving since my wife passed, trying to find somewhere to settle." He glanced at Rose, who was eating steadily and listening to everything. Some were quiet. Clara looked at him steadily. "Quiet isn't the word I'd use for this valley right now." "I heard something about that in town." He set his spoon down. "Victor Hale." The name landed in the room like a stone dropped in still water. "What did you hear?" Clara said. "That he's been pressuring ranchers to sell. That some have. That some who didn't have had some bad luck." His voice was even, matter of fact. "That he's got a man named Cole Briggs running his dirty work." "Cole Briggs burned the Grayson ranch," Clara said. "Bill Grayson had 2 broken fingers and a cut across his face when we found him. Said 3 men came in the night. Nobody in town will say Hale's name out loud." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, "And your place?" "He sent men twice. The first time I fired a warning shot and they left." She paused. "The second time, Cole Briggs himself came to the door. Said I had 2 weeks to sign the land over, or things would get difficult." "When was that?" Clara looked at him. 10 days ago." Something changed in Ethan Callahan's face. Not alarm. Something harder than alarm. A kind of stillness that she would come to recognize over the following weeks. The stillness of a man calculating. "And you're still here," he said. "I'm still here." He picked up his spoon again. "Then you're either very brave or very stubborn." "My husband would have said both," Clara said. And she hadn't meant for it to come out soft like that, but it did, and she looked down at the table for a moment until she had herself back. Lucy had moved around the table and was now sitting beside Rose, showing her something in a small book. Pressed Wildflowers, Clara recognized, the book her daughter had been filling all summer. Rose was leaning over to look at them, with an expression that was starting to crack open into something warmer. Clara looked at Ethan Callahan. "I'll pay you $2 a week and your meals. You and the girl can sleep in the bunkhouse. It's clean and the roof's sound." She stood up. "But I want to be clear about something." He looked up at her. "This is my land," she said. "My husband built this ranch with his own hands. He is buried 40 yards from this house, and I will not leave him here alone while Victor Hale puts his cattle on top of everything James Whitmore worked for. So if you're looking for easy work and an easy situation, you can finish your supper and ride on." She held his gaze. "But if you're willing to work hard and stay through whatever comes, I could use the help." Ethan Callahan looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "I'll stay." He was up before dawn. Clara heard him moving in the yard when the sky was still purple-gray, and she lay in bed for a moment, listening to the sounds. The creak of the corral gate, the quiet voice he used with the horses, the steady fall of a hammer on a post she'd been meaning to replace for 3 weeks. She got up and made coffee and stood at the kitchen window, watching him work in the early light. He knew what he was doing. That was clear in the first hour. He moved around the ranch the way a man moves when work is familiar, not performative. No wasted motion, no showing off, just steady and purposeful. By mid-morning, he'd replaced 2 fence posts, rehung the barn door that had been dragging, and was repairing the tack with the focused attention of someone who understood that a broken piece of equipment could mean a thrown rider. Lucy had appointed herself his shadow by 9 o'clock, trailing behind him with questions. "Why are you wrapping that piece there?" "Because if this stitching goes while somebody's riding, the saddle shifts and somebody falls." "Did you fall off a horse?" "Many times." "Does it hurt?" "Every time." Lucy considered this. "Papa fell off once and he didn't cry." "Brave man. Mama never falls off." "I believe it," Ethan said, and Clara, who had just walked up behind them with a water canteen, caught the edge of something. Not quite a smile, but close, on his face before he turned back to the tack. She handed him the canteen without comment. Rose was quieter than Lucy, quieter than most children Clara had known. She did what was asked of her without complaint, helped clear dishes, stayed close to her father but never clung, watched everything with those serious, dark eyes. At midday, Clara set a plate in front of her, and the girl looked up and said, "Thank you, ma'am," in a voice that was careful and polite in the way children are when they've had to learn manners as a form of protection. Clara felt something tighten in her chest. "You don't have to call me ma'am," she said. "Mrs. Whitmore is fine. Or Clara, if you prefer." Rose nodded, said nothing. But when Clara set a second biscuit on her plate without asking, the girl looked up with an expression that said more than words would have. It was on the 3rd day that Cole Briggs came back. Clara heard the horses first, 4 of them. She was in the garden pulling beets, and she stood up slowly, brushing dirt from her hands. And by the time she turned around, Ethan was already standing at the edge of the yard. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was just standing there, between the house and the riders, in that particular still way of his. Cole Briggs pulled his horse up short. He was a big man, thick through the shoulders, with a face that had been broken and healed crooked, and cold gray eyes that seemed to find everything they looked at amusing in a dangerous way. He surveyed the yard, clocked Ethan, and one corner of his mouth lifted. "Didn't know the widow had herself a hired man," he said. "Mrs. Whitmore hired me on," Ethan said. "Can I help you gentlemen with something?" Briggs looked past him at Clara. "I came to see if she'd given any more thought to Mr. Hale's offer." "Mr. Hale's offer," Clara said clearly, stepping forward until she was standing beside Ethan, "is not an offer. It's a threat. And my answer is the same as it was 10 days ago." Briggs clicked his tongue. "Ma'am, that's a real shame. Mr. Hale is a patient man, but patience has its limits." His eyes moved back to Ethan. "And who exactly are you, friend?" "Just a man who fixes fences," Ethan said. "Uh-huh," Briggs studied him. "You got a name?" "Callahan." Something moved through Cole Briggs's expression, something quick that he shut down fast, but Clara caught it. A flicker of recognition, or something close to it, there and gone before she could read it. "Well, Callahan," Briggs said slowly, "I'd think real careful before tying myself to a losing cause. This valley's going to look different come fall. You might want to be somewhere else by then." "I appreciate the advice," Ethan said. "I'll give it all the thought it deserves." The 2 men looked at each other for a moment that stretched out long and taut. Then Briggs pulled his horse around. The 3 riders behind him followed, and Clara stood there watching them go until the dust settled back on the road. She turned to Ethan. "You recognized each other." "I don't know what you mean." "Briggs, when you said your name, something changed in his face." Ethan was quiet for a long moment. He watched the road where the riders had gone. Then he said, I spent 6 years as a deputy marshal in Wyoming Territory. Cole Briggs ran with a crew I helped break up in '71. He did 2 years in Laramie. He paused. He remembers me. Clara absorbed that. Is that going to be a problem? Ethan turned and looked at her. It means he's going to tell Hale who I am. And Hale is going to want to know why I'm here. And what are you going to tell him? Nothing, Ethan said. Because he's not going to ask me directly. Men like Hale don't ask questions directly. He bent and picked up the hammer he'd set down when the riders came. But it does mean things are going to move faster than I expected. He went back to the fence post he'd been working on, like the conversation was finished. Clara stood there for a moment. Then she said, "Why did you leave the marshals?" He didn't stop working. My wife got sick. She needed me home. The hammer came down once, clean and hard. Then she died, and there was no reason to go back. Clara didn't say anything else. She turned and walked back to her garden. Behind her, she heard the steady rhythm of the hammer and the low murmur of Ethan Callahan's voice as Rose appeared from somewhere and came to sit on the fence rail nearby, watching her father work. And he said something to her that Clara couldn't hear, and the girl laughed. A small, quick sound, like something startled into the open before it could be stopped. Clara kept walking, but she was smiling. That night, she found Lucy and Rose asleep in Lucy's bed, head to foot, the Wildflower book open between them. She stood in the doorway for a long moment, looking at them. Then she walked out to the porch and sat down in the chair James had built and looked out at the dark, wide Montana sky. The stars were enormous. They always were in summer, out here away from any town. She thought about Victor Hale's men on their horses. She thought about Cole Briggs' crooked smile and the flicker of something cold in his eyes when Ethan said his name. She thought about the Grayson family on the road with nothing. She thought about James, under his cross 40 yards away, in the ground he'd broken with his own hands. "Not yet," she told him silently. "Not yet." Inside the bunkhouse, a lamp was still burning. Through the small window, she could see the outline of Ethan Callahan sitting at the table, head bent over something. Writing, maybe, or just thinking. She didn't know this man, not really. 3 days was nothing. A name and a set of capable hands and a few sentences about a dead wife and a past she hadn't asked enough about. But her daughter was asleep next to his daughter, and he had put himself between her and Cole Briggs without being asked. And he had told her the truth about who he was, even when he didn't have to. That was something. Out on the dark thicket of Montana thicket, a coyote called once, sharp and lonesome, and was answered by another, far away. Clara sat in James's chair and listened. And somewhere beyond the ridge, in the big house that looked out over the whole valley, Victor Hale was already hearing from Cole Briggs what had happened, and who was standing between him and the last piece of land he needed. The night was warm. The stars burned white and cold. And on the Whitmore ranch, for the first time in a long time, there were 2 lamps burning instead of 1. The letter arrived on a Tuesday. Clara knew what it was before she even opened it, because the man who delivered it wasn't the regular postwriter. He was one of Hale's men. She recognized the brand on the horse's flank, and he didn't dismount. He just leaned down and held the envelope out with the flat expression of someone delivering a message they'd been paid not to think about. And the moment she took it from his hand, he turned and rode away without a word. She stood in the yard and read it. The language was polite. It was always polite with Victor Hale. That was the particular cruelty of the man. He wrote in the careful sentences of a businessman discussing a reasonable transaction, and you had to read it twice to understand that underneath the pleasantries, He was describing the destruction of everything you owned. Given the recent difficulties facing small operations in this valley, it is my sincere hope that Mrs. Whitmore will reconsider the generous offer previously extended. The land in question sits at the heart of a water corridor vital to the continued prosperity of this region. Should she choose not to respond by Friday next, I cannot guarantee the safety of operations in that area, as the terrain has proven unpredictable in dry conditions. Unpredictable in dry conditions. He meant fire. Ethan was at the barn when she walked in and held the letter out without a word. He took it, read it, folded it once along the existing crease, and handed it back. "Friday," he said. "That's 4 days." "I know." He turned back to the horse he'd been examining, lifting its left foreleg with practiced ease. "He's escalating because he knows about me," Briggs told him, "and now he's moving faster." "Because of you?" Clara's voice was sharp. "He's giving me 4 days because of you?" "He was always going to push harder. I just gave him a reason to do it sooner." Ethan set the hoof down and straightened. "That's not an apology. It's a fact." "There's a difference?" "There is." He looked at her directly. "If I wasn't here, he'd have sent Briggs again. Maybe roughed up your cattle. Maybe worse. The letter means he's still thinking about this like a business problem. That's better for you." 4 days doesn't feel better." "No," he said, "it doesn't." Lucy appeared in the barn doorway with Rose behind her, both of them holding the bucket they'd been using to collect eggs, both of them reading the silence between the adults, with the antenna children develop when they've learned that quiet between grown-ups usually means trouble. "Mama," Lucy said. "Go put those eggs in the kitchen," Clara said. "I'll be right in." She watched them go, then she turned back to Ethan. "What do we do?" He was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was measured. "We need to know how many ranchers Hale is still pressuring. Not the ones who already sold, the ones who are still holding on, but scared." "The Pattersons." "The Delacroix family, out on the North Ridge. Old Mel Sutter, though he's mostly alone now since his son left." She paused. "The Harrisons, maybe. I don't know where they stand. I need you to get word to them. Not by letter. In person." He looked at her steadily. "Can you ride out tomorrow?" "I can ride out today." "Tomorrow's better. I want to check something first." "Check what?" He picked up the curry brush and went back to the horse, and didn't answer. Clara stared at the back of his head for a full 3 seconds. "Ethan Callahan," she said, and the steadiness in her own voice surprised her. "This is my ranch, and my land, and my 4 days. If you know something, you will tell me." He stopped, turned around slowly. "In Laramie," he said, "when we broke up Briggs's crew, there were 4 men. We caught 3. The 4th one, the one who set up most of their land grabs, who had the connections to the county clerk, who knew how to make property records disappear. We never found him." He paused. "His name was Donald Reeve. He operated out of Wyoming, but he had ties up into Montana territory." He held her gaze. "I want to ride into town today and look at the deed records for every ranch Hale has bought in this valley in the last 3 years. Because if Donald Reeve is involved in this, it means the transactions are fraudulent. And if they're fraudulent, Hale's entire operation falls apart." The barn was very quiet. "You think Reeve is here?" Clara said. "I think it's possible." "And if he is? Then we don't just have a bully with hired guns. We have a criminal conspiracy. And that changes what we can do about it." He paused. "It also means it's a lot more dangerous than I told you yesterday." Clara exhaled slowly. "You should have told me that this morning." "I know. If you're going to be useful to me, you cannot keep deciding what I'm ready to hear." Something shifted in his expression. Not quite guilt, but close enough to it. "You're right," he said. "I won't do that again." She studied him for another moment. Then she nodded once, short and decisive. "Ride into town. I'll start making a list of what we need from the other ranchers." She turned toward the barn door. "And Ethan." "Yeah?" "Take Rose with you. Lucy's been asking to show her the creek." She was almost at the door when he said quietly, "Thank you." She didn't stop walking, but she felt the words land. He was back by late afternoon. The girls were at the creek with Clara's rifle and strict instructions to stay on the near bank, and Clara was on the porch shelling beans when Ethan's horse came up the road at a pace that told her, before he dismounted, that he'd found something. He was off the horse before it fully stopped. He took the porch steps in too and sat down across from her without preamble and said, "Reeve is here. He's working under the name Donald Reed, county surveyor. He's been with Hale for at least 2 years." Clara's hands stilled on the beans. "Every deed transfer in this valley for the last 26 months has his stamp on it," Ethan continued, his voice low and fast now. "Including 3 ranches where the original owners told people they sold willingly. Henry Adder from the Box H, the Calloway widow over near Buckhorn Creek. Both of them signed under duress, and Reeve backdated the paperwork to make it look clean." He put a folded sheet on the porch rail between them. "I copied what I could before the clerk noticed what I was doing." Clara unfolded the paper. The names were in his handwriting, quick and angular, and the dates beside them told a story that made her stomach drop. "He's been building this for 2 years. Longer. He and Hale had this plan before either of them set foot in this valley." "Can you prove it?" "I can prove some of it. The rest—" He stopped, ran a hand across the back of his neck. "I need a witness, somebody who was pressured and signed and is willing to say so in front of people." "Henry Adder," Clara said immediately. "You know him?" "He came through here in April. He'd been drinking and he told me and James, that Hale's men had held a gun on his youngest son. That's why he signed. But the next morning he was sober and terrified and said he'd deny it if anyone repeated it." She put the paper down. "He's scared." Most people who know something are scared. "Can you blame them?" She looked at him. "Briggs shot a man in Cutter's Creek last winter. Shot him in the street in front of witnesses, and every one of those witnesses suddenly couldn't remember what they saw. Victor Hale owns the judge in this county, Ethan. He might own the territorial marshal." "He doesn't own every marshal," Ethan said. Clara looked at him sharply. "You're still connected." "I know people. That's not what I asked." He met her eyes. "There's a deputy marshal out of Helena named George Taft. He's been building a case against Hale for 18 months. He reached out to me 3 months ago and asked if I'd come up here and see what I could find." The beans sat forgotten in her lap. "So you didn't come here by accident," she said. "No." "You knew about this valley before you came?" "Yes." "And the job, asking me for work?" "I genuinely needed work." His voice was steady, not defensive, just honest in the way of a man who has decided to stop managing a conversation and just tell the truth. "Taft gave me the general shape of it. He didn't know about you specifically. I asked around in town and heard you were holding out and needed help." A pause. "I wasn't lying about needing the work, or about Rose needing somewhere to be." Clara was quiet. Her hands were flat on her lap, perfectly still, which was the thing she did when she was most angry. James had always known that. Not the scrubbing, not the pacing, the stillness. "I want to be angry with you," she said finally. "That's fair. But you told me the truth when I asked, and you could have kept lying." "I was going to tell you last night," he said. "I decided to wait until I'd confirmed Reeve. I didn't want to hand you a theory." "That's the second time in one day you've decided what I was ready to hear." "I know." He didn't look away. It won't happen a third time. She picked up the beans again. This deputy marshal in Helena, how long before he can do anything? He needs the evidence I'm building. Another week, maybe 2. We have 4 days before Hale's deadline. I know that too. She worked through the beans in silence for a moment. Then, we ride out to the Patterson ranch in the morning, both of us. She glanced at him sideways. Rose and Lucy can manage the morning chores together. Lucy will make sure of it. She's been looking for a reason to be in charge of something. For the first time since she'd known him, all of 4 days, Ethan Callahan smiled. A real one. Brief and almost surprised, like he'd forgotten he knew how. She reminds me of Rose, he said. 2 years ago. Before... He stopped. Before her mother, Clara said quietly. Yeah. She didn't push it. She'd learned already that some things in this man had to come at their own pace, like horses that had been mishandled. Not skittish, not broken, just careful about who they let come close. They sat on the porch in the warmth of the fading afternoon, and down at the creek she could hear Lucy's voice carrying, sharp and animated, explaining something with great conviction. And after a moment, she heard Rose's voice answering. More words than she'd heard from the girl in 4 days combined. Something eased in Clara's chest. Something she hadn't known was held tight. Patterson's ranch was a 40-minute ride north, and Bill Patterson met them at his gate with a shotgun across his arm and an expression that said he was glad to see them and wished they hadn't come in equal measure. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s, sunburned to leather, with kind eyes that had gotten tired. His wife Ellen stood in the doorway of the house behind him, arms crossed, watching. "Clara," he said. He looked at Ethan. "Who's this?" "Ethan Callahan. He's working for me." She kept her horse steady. "We need to talk, Bill." He let them in. They sat at the kitchen table, and Clara laid it out plainly. The letter. What Ethan had found in the deed records. Donald Reeve operating as Reed. The connection to Helena and Deputy Taft. She watched Bill Patterson's face go through the whole sequence. Surprise. Recognition. Anger. And then the fear that moved in underneath the anger and sat there. 2 weeks ago, he said slowly, Cole Briggs came out here. He didn't threaten outright. He just talked about how dry the summer was. Said he'd heard there were some range fires down south that were burning toward Montana. He looked at Ellen. I told him to get off my land. And since then, Ethan said, 3 of my cattle found dead in the east pasture Monday morning. No marks, no tracks, just dead. They poisoned the water, Ethan said flatly. There's a technique. Small amount of something in an isolated trough. Looks natural. Briggs learned it working for a rancher in Colorado in the 60s. He paused. Bill, I need you to listen to me carefully. We have enough to take to Taft. But Taft needs more than paperwork. He needs people willing to speak. You and Ellen, Henry Adder, the Delacroix family. People who can say what was done to them. Bill Patterson looked at the table. Bill, Clara's voice was quiet and very direct. I know you're scared. I am too. But if we don't do this, come fall, there will be no small ranches left in this valley. Victor Hale will own the water and the land, and every one of us will be working for wages on land we used to own. She held his gaze. James would have stood up. You know that. The mention of her husband's name moved through the room like something physical. Ellen Patterson unfolded her arms. Bill, she said. Her voice was soft, but there was iron in it. We already lost the Graysons. I won't watch us lose Clara, too. Bill looked at his wife, then at Clara, then at Ethan, in the assessing way of a man measuring whether the person asking him to take a risk is worth the risk. "This deputy marshal," he said. "He's real? Not connected to Hale?" "I'll stake my life on George Taft," Ethan said. "I've known him 11 years. You'd be staking all our lives." "Yes," Ethan said simply. "I would." The kitchen was very quiet. Bill Patterson put both hands flat on the table, looked at them. Then he said, "You ride out to Adder and Delacroix. You get them sitting at a table together, and you send word to me." He looked up. "I'll be there." Clara reached across and put her hand over Ellen Patterson's. Ellen turned her palm up and gripped it hard. They were riding back toward the Whitmore ranch, the sun already past its peak and the air hot and still, when Ethan said, "One more." "Adder," Clara said. "Today." She glanced at him. "That's another 2 hours round trip, and we told the girls we'd be back by midday." "I know, but I need to see Henry Adder before Briggs does." Clara turned her horse east without another word, because she had the same feeling in her chest that she recognized from years of watching weather come in over the ridge. The specific pressure that meant a storm was close, closer than you thought, and the time you had left was not as much as you'd calculated. The time they had, she was beginning to understand, was not measured in days. It was measured in hours. And when they reached the turnoff toward Adder's land and found fresh horse tracks in the dust, 3 horses, heading the same direction they were going, Ethan pulled his horse up sharp and looked at her, and she looked at him, and neither of them said a word. They kicked their horses into a gallop. They heard Henry Adder before they saw him. His voice was high and cracked at the edges, the voice of a man past reasoning with fear and into something rawer. And when Clara and Ethan came around the bend at a full gallop, they saw him standing in front of his porch with both arms out wide, not in surrender, but in the desperate blocking posture of a man trying to put himself between something and someone behind him. Cole Briggs sat his horse 6 feet away, with 2 riders flanking him. "Henry." Briggs's voice was almost gentle, which was the worst version of it. "We've had this conversation before. Mr. Hale just wants an answer." "I gave him an answer. He didn't like that answer." Ethan pulled his horse up hard and was on the ground before the animal fully stopped. Clara came in right behind him, and Briggs turned his head at the sound of hooves, and his eyes moved from Ethan to Clara and back with a flat, measuring expression that didn't change much, but sharpened at the edges. "Callahan," he said. The gentle tone was gone. "Briggs." Ethan walked forward, unhurried, stopped about 10 feet from the nearest rider. "This looks like a private conversation. Maybe take it somewhere else. Maybe mind your own business. Mrs. Whitmore asked me to ride out this way, so this is my business." Briggs looked at Clara. "You keep showing up in places you shouldn't, ma'am. That's a habit that gets people hurt." "So does threatening old men on their own land," Clara said. She kept her voice level, but her hand was on the stock of the rifle in its scabbard, and she did not move it. Henry Adder turned and saw her, and something in his face cracked open. Relief and shame in equal measure. The look of a man who has been caught being afraid by someone he respects. "Clara," he said, "you shouldn't have—" "Henry, go inside," she said. "Now listen here," Briggs started. "He's got nothing to sign and nothing to say to you today." Clara moved her horse 2 steps forward. "And if Mr. Hale has any further business with Mr. Adder, he can send a letter through the proper post, like a man with nothing to hide. You tell him that." The silence stretched out long and mean. Then Briggs turned his cold gray eyes on Ethan, and something passed between the 2 men that had no words in it, just history and threat, and the specific mutual recognition of 2 people who know exactly how dangerous the other one is. "Clock's running, Callahan," Briggs said quietly. Friday doesn't move. He turned his horse. His men followed, and the three of them rode back up the road without hurrying, the way men ride when they want you to understand they're not scared of you. Henry Adder sat down on his porch steps like his legs had simply decided they were done. Clara dismounted and went to him and crouched down in front of him. He was 71 years old, and he looked every year of it right now, his hands shaking slightly on his knees. "Henry," she said softly. "I can't do it, Clara." His voice was a wreck. "My boy, if I say a word and Hale comes after my boy—" "Your boy is in Billings," she said. "He's safe there." "He can get to Billings." "Not if we do this right." She waited until he looked at her. "I need you to listen to me. Ethan has connections to a deputy marshal in Helena. A real one. Federal. We have proof of what Reeve has been doing with the deeds. We have Bill Patterson. We need you, Henry. What you told me and James, what Briggs's men did to your boy to make you sign, that is exactly the kind of testimony that puts Hale away." Henry Adder looked at Ethan, who had stayed back, giving them room. "You really got a federal man?" "George Taft," Ethan said. "He's been building this case for 18 months. What you have to say fills in the piece he's been missing." "And you think that stops Hale? A man who owns the county judge?" "Taft doesn't work for the county," Ethan said. "He works for the territory. And the case he's building goes up past the territory." He paused. "Hale's been land grabbing in 3 counties, Henry. You're not the only valley he's done this to. You're just the one where he got sloppy." Henry was quiet for a long time. Clara didn't push him. She stayed crouched in front of him and waited and let him sit with it, because she understood that some decisions couldn't be rushed, and that rushing them just made them come out wrong. Finally, Henry said, "When?" 3 days, Ethan said. Henry looked at Clara. "You sure about this man?" "Not entirely," Clara said honestly. "But I'm sure about what happens if we do nothing. And that's worse." Henry Adder nodded once, small and slow, like a man putting down something heavy. 3 days, he said. They were back on the road toward home when the first plume of smoke appeared on the horizon. Clara saw it at the same moment Ethan did, and they both stopped, and for one terrible stretched second, neither of them moved, because they both knew exactly what direction that smoke was coming from. And the knowing of it hit Clara like a fist under the ribs. "Lucy," she said. They ran their horses. The smoke was coming from the eastern pasture, not the house. Clara got that far in her assessment before she was off her horse and running for the cabin, calling her daughter's name with a voice that had no composure left in it at all. Lucy came out the front door at a dead run and hit her mother so hard they both staggered. "We saw them," Lucy said into Clara's shoulder, words tumbling fast and shaky. "We were in the yard, and Rose saw them first. 4 men. They came around the east fence line, and they had torches." "Are you hurt?" Clara pulled back and ran her hands over her daughter's face, her arms. "Look at me, Lucy. Are you hurt?" "No, I'm fine. I got us inside. I bolted the door like you showed me." "Where's Rose?" A beat. Lucy's face changed. Clara went cold. "She was right behind me," Lucy whispered. "She was right." Ethan was already past them both, moving toward the barn, and Clara heard him call Rose's name once, sharp, and then again, and then silence. She found him standing in the middle of the barn, with his head turning, scanning every corner. And the look on his face was something she'd never seen on him before. Not the stillness, not the careful measuring, but raw, stripped-down terror. The kind that lives in the space between a parent's heartbeat when they can't account for their child. "Ethan," Clara put her hand on his arm. "She was right here." His voice was barely a voice. "Lucy said she was right behind her." "Rose!" Lucy was in the barn doorway. "Rose, it's okay. They're gone." For 3 seconds, nothing moved. Then the hayloft ladder shook, and a small pair of boots appeared at the top, and Rose Callahan climbed down with deliberate, mechanical calm. And when she hit the ground floor, she walked straight to her father and put both arms around his waist without saying a word. Ethan went down on one knee and held on. Clara looked away. The east pasture was still burning. Not the barn, not the house, just the grass. A warning fire, the kind meant to show you what they could do if they decided to do it properly. She walked out of the barn and stood looking at it, and her hands were shaking, and she made them stop. Ethan came out a minute later. Rose was still attached to his side, one hand knotted in his coat. He looked at the fire, and his jaw was set hard, and the careful measuring quality was back in his eyes. But underneath it now, there was something colder and more directed than she'd seen before. "They moved early," he said. "They're not waiting for Friday." "No." He looked at her. "We need to send word to Taft, tonight. Not in 3 days. Tonight." "The telegraph is in town. If Hale's watching the office—" "He is. But there's a station master in Cutter's Creek who owes me a favor." He paused. "I need to ride tonight." Clara looked at Rose. The girl looked back at her with those serious, dark eyes. "She stays here with us," Clara said. Rose looked up at her father. Ethan looked at Clara, and she understood that he was reading whether she meant it or whether she was just being practical. And she held his gaze steady so he could see it was both. "All right," he said. Then to Rose, quietly, "You stay close to Clara." Rose nodded. Then she said, very quietly, the most words Clara had heard from her at once, "Come back before morning." Ethan looked at his daughter for a moment with an expression that had everything in it: love and grief and the particular anguish of a parent who keeps putting themselves in danger and cannot stop. "I'll be back before morning," he said. "I promise." He was on his horse and gone before the sun finished setting. Clara didn't sleep. She sat in the front room with the Winchester across her knees and the lamp turned low. And Lucy slept on the settle with her head on a folded blanket. And Rose sat across from Clara in the wooden chair by the cold hearth, not sleeping either. Around midnight, Clara said quietly, "You can sleep. I'll watch." "I don't sleep when he's out," Rose said. Clara looked at her. "How long has he been doing this, riding out at night?" "Since Mama died." Rose's voice was matter-of-fact, in the way children's voices are when they've had time to get used to a hard thing. "He doesn't always do the night rides now. But before, when we were moving, sometimes he'd be gone all night and I'd wait." "That must have been frightening." "I learned to wait quiet." Rose looked at her hands in her lap. "He always comes back." "He will tonight too," Clara said. Rose looked up at her. "You don't know that." "No," Clara said honestly. "I don't. But your father is the most careful man I've met in a long time. And he has a reason to be careful that matters more to him than anything else." She met the girl's eyes. "You." Something moved through Rose's expression, something young and unguarded, there and then refolded neatly back into the composure she wore like a second skin. "Lucy's lucky," Rose said after a moment. Clara felt the words settle into her chest and stay there. "Why do you say that?" "She has you." A pause. "You're not scared. Even when you're scared, you're not scared. Lucy knows you'll always be here." Rose looked down again. "I worry about my papa." "He worries about you too," Clara said. "That's why he'll be careful." The night stretched on. Twice, Clara heard horses on the road, and both times she was on her feet before she decided to stand, rifle in hand. But both times the sound passed and faded, and she sat back down. Rose watched her each time, with those measuring eyes, and said nothing.
At 3 in the morning, Lucy stirred, looked around, registered Rose sitting awake across the room, and without a word, got up and went and sat on the floor beside Rose's chair, and leaned against her shoulder, and went back to sleep. Rose sat very still for a moment, like she wasn't sure what to do with the weight of it. Then she put her hand gently on top of Lucy's hair and kept watching the door. Clara kept watching it too. Ethan came through the door at 4:30. He was dusty and tired, and he looked at Rose first, the way he always did, the same quick inventory Clara did when she looked at Lucy, checking, accounting for all the pieces, making sure. "Telegraph sent," he said. He sat down heavily in the chair by the table. "Taft will have it by morning. He said—" He stopped, shook his head slightly. "I need a minute." Clara poured him water from the pitcher and set it in front of him, and he drank half of it without stopping. "He said," Ethan continued, "that he needs 48 hours to move. He's got 2 other deputies he can bring in, but they're in Bozeman. They have to ride." "We don't have 48 hours," Clara said. "I know. They burned my east pasture tonight as a message, Ethan. The next thing they burn will be the barn." "I know that too." He set the cup down, looked at her. "Which is why I need to tell you what I didn't tell Taft." The lamp flickered. "When I was in town for the telegraph," he said carefully, "I heard something at the station. Hale's called a gathering at his main ranch for tomorrow evening. All his men. Briggs, the riders, the whole operation." He paused. "He's moving on every remaining ranch in the valley at once. Tomorrow night. Not just yours. All of them. Patterson, Adder, Delacroix, the Harrisons. All of them in one night, so there's no warning and no coordination." The room was very quiet. Clara understood immediately what that meant. Not just for her. For every family she'd spoken to. For Bill Patterson and Ellen and the years they'd put into their land. For Henry Adder and his shaking hands. For every small operation in this valley that had held on. "How many men does Hale have?" she said. 15, maybe 18, counting the ones he brought in last week. "And we have—" "Us." He held her gaze. "And whoever the other ranchers will put on a horse by tomorrow afternoon." Clara sat back. Her mind was already moving, already sorting it. Not in panic, but in the cold, practical way she'd learned to think when the alternative was falling apart. She thought about Bill Patterson's shotgun and his broad shoulders, and his eyes that had gone tired, but not dead. She thought about Henry Adder, 71 years old, who had put himself between Cole Briggs and whatever was behind him. She thought about Delacroix, who she didn't know well, but who had not sold, which meant something. She thought about James, in the ground 40 yards away, who had always said that the problem with waiting for other people to act was that it took too long and cost too much. "We ride out at dawn," she said. "All the ranches, in one morning. We tell them what you told me. We give them the choice." She looked at Ethan directly. "And we don't ask permission. We tell them." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Then, "You understand that if we pull these families together and something goes wrong, that's on us. If we don't pull these families together and Hale burns them out one by one, that's on us too." She stood up. "At least this way they have a choice." Rose had fallen asleep against the armrest of the chair, with Lucy still leaning on her, both girls breathing slow and even. And Clara looked at them for a moment. The particular fierceness that moved through her when she looked at her daughter, and the way it had quietly extended over the past week to include this other girl with the careful eyes and the too small dress, and the voice that came out at 3 in the morning saying, "I worry about my papa." "Get some sleep," she said to Ethan. 2 hours. I'll wake you." He didn't argue.
He put his head down on his arms at the kitchen table and was asleep in under a minute. Clara went back to her chair, put the Winchester across her knees, watched the door. Outside, the Montana summer dark was just beginning to thin at the edges. That first faint loosening of black into deep blue that came before any color, before any warmth, the hour before you could see what was coming. She watched it come anyway, because that was the only thing left to do. And when the blue turned gray, and the gray began to go gold, she stood up, set the rifle against the wall, and put the coffee on. She was going to need every rancher in this valley on a horse by noon. And she was going to get them. The coffee was still hot when Ethan lifted his head from his arms. Clara was already at the table with the copied deed record spread out in front of her, a pencil in her hand, and a list of names written in her tight, practical handwriting on a separate sheet. She'd let him sleep 2.5 hours. It was the most she could spare. "Patterson first," she said without looking up. "He's closest, and he's already said yes. We use him to anchor the others." Ethan straightened, rolled his neck, looked at the papers she'd organized. He didn't say anything about the fact that she'd clearly been up the entire time. He just pulled the list toward him, read it, and said, "Delacroix won't come without his brother. His brother's been trying to sell since February. Then we split up. You ride to Delacroix, I'll go to the Harrisons. The Harrisons have a boy of 17. If this turns into a fight, Martin Harrison is 34, Clara said. The boy is his son, and Martin Harrison watched his father build that ranch from nothing, and he has no intention of giving it away." She looked up. "I know these people, Ethan. You don't." He held her gaze. Then he nodded. "All right, we split up." Rose and Lucy were awake by the time they were saddling horses, both of them moving through morning chores with a wordless coordination that had developed over the past week. Lucy leading, Rose following, each knowing her task. Clara watched them from the barn and felt a complicated kind of pride that had 2 children in it instead of 1, which still surprised her when she noticed it. "Lucy," Clara crouched down in front of her daughter, "I need you to listen to me very carefully." Lucy stood straight. She was 8 years old, and she had her father's eyes and her mother's jaw, and she knew by Clara's tone that this was not a conversation she should interrupt. "I'm going to be gone most of the morning. Mr. Callahan will be gone too. You and Rose are going to stay inside with the door bolted. You're not going to open it for anyone except me or Ethan. Not for anyone who says they know us. Not for anyone who says there's an emergency." She paused. "Do you understand?" "What if there's a real emergency?" "The rifle is on the table. You know how to load it." She looked at her daughter's face. "But you will not need it. I am telling you that because it is true, and I don't lie to you about true things." Lucy nodded. Then she said quietly, "Is tonight when it happens?" Clara blinked. "What?" "I heard you and Mr. Callahan talking about Hale moving on all the ranches." Lucy's voice was steady in the unsettling way of children who have decided to be brave. "Is tonight when it happens?" Clara put both hands on her daughter's face. "Tonight we're going to be ready," she said. "That's the difference between tonight and every other night. We're going to be ready." She kissed Lucy's forehead, stood up, got on her horse. She didn't look back, because if she looked back, she would not be able to leave. Martin Harrison said yes before she finished explaining. He was standing in his doorway, with his arms crossed, and his son Tom beside him, 17, and trying to look older. And when Clara laid out what Ethan had found in the deed records, and what Briggs had done to Adder, and what Hale was planning for that night, Martin's jaw tightened incrementally with each sentence until it was set hard as stone. "I've been waiting for somebody to say this out loud," he said. "How many ranchers you have so far?" "Patterson, Adder if his nerve holds, you if you're in, Callahan's at Delacroix now. Delacroix's brother has been pushing him to sell. I know. What about Sutter? Clara paused. She hadn't ridden to Mel Sutter. He was the oldest of them, lived alone since his son left, and she'd made a private judgment that he couldn't contribute much. She said so. Martin looked at her steadily. Mel Sutter put 30 years into this valley. Don't decide for him what he can and can't do.
The words landed, and she took them. You're right, she said. I'll go to Sutter. I'll go, Tom Harrison said. Martin looked at his son. Clara watched something pass between them. The specific negotiation of a father and a son when the son is asking to be counted as a man. You go, Martin said. Ride straight there and straight back. Nobody else. Tom was on his horse before his father finished the sentence. Clara and Martin Harrison rode together toward the Patterson Ranch, and she used the time to tell him the rest of it. Taft, the 48 hours, the plan she and Ethan had talked through in the thin, early morning. 48 hours means Taft doesn't get here until tomorrow, Martin said. But Hale moves tonight. Yes. So we have to hold tonight without federal backup. Yes. Martin was quiet for a moment. How? We need to be somewhere Hale doesn't expect. Not at our own ranches, waiting to be picked off one at a time. She'd been turning this over since before Ethan woke up. We need to be together. One location, all of us. With enough people that Briggs and his riders can't take us by force without it becoming something they can't call an accident. Where? The crossroads. The one between Patterson's land and the Adder property. It's open ground, there's no cover for an ambush, and it's visible from 3 directions. She paused. We make them come to us, in front of witnesses. Martin looked at her sideways. You want to bait them. I want to make them make a choice in the open. Cole Briggs will burn an empty barn. He won't massacre 15 ranchers at a crossroads in front of witnesses. She met Martin's eyes. He's brutal. He's not stupid. And if you're wrong about that, then we make sure we're better armed than they are, Clara said. Martin Harrison looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, in the tone of a man making a decision he'd already made before he finished thinking about it. My father had a saying. He said the only thing scarier than a man with nothing to lose is a woman with something to protect. He looked ahead down the road. I think he was right. Ethan was already at Patterson's when they arrived, and the look on his face when Clara rode in told her the Delacroix conversation hadn't been simple. Jean-Pierre Delacroix is in, he said. His brother left this morning, hacked his family, and went toward Billings. He said it without inflection, but she heard the weight in it. Another family broken apart by Hale's pressure. Another one who chose to run rather than stand. Bill Patterson was on his porch with a shotgun and 2 rifles leaned against the railing. Ellen was there too, which Clara had not expected, standing with her arms folded and the expression of a woman who had already done her grieving about the danger and come out the other side into something quieter and harder. Ellen, Clara started. Don't, Ellen said simply. Bill goes, I'm here. That's all. Henry Adder arrived 20 minutes later on a horse that looked nearly as tired as he did, with Tom Harrison riding beside him and old Mel Sutter, 80 years old and iron-spined, bringing up the rear on a gray mare that moved like she'd been doing this her whole life. When Clara saw Mel Sutter, she thought of what Martin had said and felt the correction of it in her chest. They gathered in Patterson's yard, 7 people, with Tom Harrison making 8, and Ethan standing slightly apart the way he did when he was thinking hard. Clara stood in front of them and said it plain. No softening, no building up to it. Hale's plan, tonight, all ranches at once. Taft coming, but not in time. The crossroads. What she was asking. When she finished, nobody spoke for a moment.
Then Mel Sutter said in his paper-dry voice, "I've been in this valley since before most of you were born."
I watched Victor Hale buy up the North Quarter and the East Ridge and smile at every man he took it from, like he was doing them a favor. He shifted in his saddle. "I'm tired of watching. Where do you want me?" It moved through the group. Clara felt it, the way a change in air pressure moves through a room, not loud, but definite. Something that had been held loose tightened. "Crossroads," Ethan said. "By 4 o'clock. Bring every weapon you own and every person on your property who can hold one." He looked around the group. "And tell nobody in town. Not a word." They split and rode. The crossroads at 4 o'clock held 11 people, 4 of whom were women, 3 of whom were over 60, and every single one of whom had a gun. Clara counted them and felt something she hadn't expected. Not just determination, which she'd had since the beginning, but a kind of humbling gratitude that these people had come, that they were here, standing in the late afternoon heat of a Montana summer on a road between their homes because someone had asked them to stand. She was standing with Ethan, going over the positions. Who would be where, what the signal was, what they did if Briggs came in from the south instead of the north. When Martin Harrison said quietly, "Rider coming." Everyone moved. Not chaos, the practiced readiness of people who had been waiting for something to arrive. The rider came in fast, and Clara recognized the horse before she recognized the man. Tom Harrison, who had stayed at the Patterson Ranch as their lookout. He pulled up hard. He was breathing fast, not from exertion. "They're not waiting till dark," he said. "Briggs left Hale's main ranch 20 minutes ago. 12 riders. They split into 2 groups at the South Fork." He looked at Clara. "One group's headed toward your place." Clara's whole body went cold. Lucy. She was already turning her horse when Ethan's hand closed on her arm. "Clara, my daughter is in that house." "I know." His voice was low and controlled and direct. "Listen to me. If you ride back alone, Briggs's group runs you down on the road. You won't get there before them." He held her arm, not hard, but steadily. "We go together. All of us." "That splits the group." "Briggs split first. He thinks we're each at our own ranch." Ethan looked around at the assembled ranchers, quick and decisive. "Patterson, Harrison, you take your people to the Henderson Crossroads, the north end. Hold there and don't move unless you hear shots. We ride for the Whitmore Ranch." "How many men in that group?" Martin Harrison said. "6, according to Tom," Ethan said. "We have 7 here. Those are workable numbers." Clara was already moving. Ethan came alongside her, and they rode hard, and she did not let herself think about Lucy, because thinking about Lucy right now was something she could not afford, and so she put the thought in a locked place and rode. Mel Sutter, who was 80 years old and had been in this valley since before most of them were born, rode with them. They heard it before they saw it. Not fire this time. Voices. Specifically, Cole Briggs's voice, carrying in that almost gentle way of his that was worse than shouting. They came around the last bend, and the Whitmore Ranch was in front of them, and Briggs's 6 riders were arranged in a loose line in the yard, and Briggs himself was on foot, standing 10 yards from the front door, and the front door was still closed. Clara's heart slammed back into operation. The door was closed. Lucy had kept it closed. Briggs turned at the sound of hooves. He looked at the 7 riders coming in, and something moved through his expression. Calculation, rapid and precise, and then a kind of settling that told her he'd decided how he was going to play this. "Mrs. Whitmore," he said, "this is getting tiresome." Clara pulled her horse up in the yard and dismounted and walked toward him, and she was aware of everything. Ethan coming off his horse to her right, Mel Sutter and Jean-Pierre Delacroix spreading to her left, the 6 Hale riders reading the new numbers with expressions that had lost some of their ease. "Get off my land," Clara said. "We've had this conversation several times now." "We're having it the last time." She stopped 8 feet from him. "Your operation is over, Briggs. Reeve is known. The deeds are known. Deputy Marshal Taft out of Helena has the documentation, and he's 2 days from here with federal authority." She held his gaze. "You can ride back to Hale and tell him that, or you can do whatever you are planning to do here, and you can spend the rest of your life in a federal prison trying to remember why it seemed worth it." Cold Briggs looked at her with those cold gray eyes for a long moment. Then he said, "You're bluffing." "Try me." His hand moved toward his gun. The front door of the cabin opened, and Lucy Whitmore walked out with a Winchester at her shoulder, aimed at Cole Briggs's chest. Her feet planted wide, the way Clara had shown her. Her face white and absolutely set. "Step back from my mother," she said. The yard went completely still. Briggs stared at the child pointing a rifle at him, with the steadiness of someone twice her age. Something moved through his face that Clara had never seen on it before. Not anger, not calculation. Something that, in another man, she might have called the first touch of genuine uncertainty. "You need to put that down, little girl," he said carefully. "You need to step back," Lucy said. She did not lower the rifle. Her hands were shaking very slightly, but her eyes were not. Behind Briggs, Clara heard one of his riders say, under his breath, "She'll do it." Another rider shifted his horse backward, a small, involuntary movement. And then Ethan Callahan said, "Time to go, Briggs." Something changed in Cole Briggs in that moment. Clara watched it happen, watched the calculation run and come up short. Watched him look at the rifles and the faces and the child who hadn't moved. Watched him understand that something had shifted in this valley that couldn't be shifted back. He was ruthless. He was not a fool. He took 2 deliberate steps backward, signaled his men with a short, sharp gesture, and without another word, he walked to his horse, mounted, and rode out of the yard with his 6 men behind him. The sound of their hooves faded. Nobody moved for 3 full seconds. Then Clara crossed the yard in 6 steps and took the Winchester from her daughter's hands and pulled Lucy against her so hard Lucy made a small, surprised sound. And Clara held on with everything she had and pressed her face into her daughter's hair. "You did so well," she said, and her voice was barely a voice. "You did so well, baby." "My hands were shaking," Lucy said into her shoulder. "I know." "I was so scared." "I know." Clara held tighter. Being scared and doing it anyway is the whole thing. That's all courage ever is. Behind her, she heard the sound of boots on the porch, and then Rose's voice, finally coming out from wherever she'd been inside, and Ethan saying her name, quiet and low, and the sound of that reunion, private and undone and real, was something Clara did not turn around to look at, because it was not hers to see. She stayed where she was, holding her daughter in the yard of the ranch her husband built. It was not over. Briggs had ridden out, not away. There was a difference. He would go back to Hale, and Hale would have to decide whether to push again or cut his losses. And that decision would depend on what reached him first. News that his operation was exposed, or the last of his ruthlessness. Taft was 2 days out. 2 days was still a long time. But they had done something today that Hale had not expected. They had not waited in their separate houses to be picked off one by one. They had stood together in an open road, and they had put 7 rifles between his men and whatever he'd planned. It wasn't finished, but it had changed. Clara raised her head, looked out at the road where Briggs had gone. Beside her, Ethan said quietly, "I need to tell you something."
She looked at him. "When I telegraphed Taft last night," he said, "he told me something I held back this morning. I wasn't sure I should say it, but—" He stopped. "Tell me," Clara said. "Taft said Hale has been in contact with somebody at the territorial level, a commissioner. He's been working to get this valley reclassified as federal grazing land, which would nullify all private deeds." He paused. "If that goes through, it doesn't matter what Reeve did with the paperwork. It doesn't matter what any of you signed or didn't sign. Every ranch in this valley disappears on a technicality." Clara stared at him. "When does that decision get made?" she said. "Taft thinks within the week." Ethan looked at her steadily. "That's why he's riding fast. It's not just Hale's men we have to beat. It's a government decision being bought in an office in Helena." The evening was going gold around them, warm and still, and somewhere behind the barn, Lucy was telling Rose what had happened in the breathless, rapid-fire way she told everything. And Clara stood in the yard her husband built and understood that they had won the afternoon and were nowhere near winning the war. "How do we beat a commissioner?" she said. Ethan reached into his coat and pulled out a folded envelope. "This was in my saddlebag. Taft left it at the station in Cutter's Creek 2 weeks ago, before I even arrived in this valley." He held it out. "He didn't tell me about it on the telegraph. I think he was being careful about who might be listening." Clara took the envelope, opened it. Inside was a single sheet with one paragraph. She read it once, read it again. Then she looked up at Ethan Callahan. "This is a signed statement from the commissioner's own assistant," she said slowly, "saying the reclassification was bought." "Yes." "Taft has had this for 2 weeks." "Yes." "And he waited—" "Until he had someone in the valley he trusted to hold it," Ethan said. "If that paper reaches the territorial governor's office before the commissioner signs the reclassification order, the whole thing falls apart. Hale loses his legal cover. The deeds stand. The marshals can move on the land grabs." He met her eyes. "But somebody has to ride to Helena with it." "That's 3 days." 2, if you push hard." Clara looked at the paper in her hands. Then she looked at the ranch around her. The barn, the fence lines, the cross 40 yards out that she could just see from where she stood. "Who goes?" she said. "Taft suggested me," Ethan said. "But I won't leave Rose. And I won't leave here unless you have enough people to hold through whatever Hale tries next." Clara folded the paper carefully, put it in her apron pocket, looked up. "Then we need a plan for tonight," she said, "because Briggs isn't going to Hale with his tail between his legs. He's going to come back with the other 6 riders, and this time he won't stop in the yard." "I know." "So who holds here?" she said. "And who rides to Helena?" The question sat between them in the fading gold of the Montana evening, and neither of them had the answer yet. But both of them understood it had to be found before dark. And dark, out here in the Summer Valley, came faster than anyone ever expected. The answer came from the last person Clara expected. Mel Sutter had been standing quietly at the edge of the yard through the whole conversation, one hand resting on his mare's neck, listening with the particular patience of a man who had watched enough things unfold to know that sometimes the best contribution was silence. But now he cleared his throat and said, "I'll ride to Helena." Clara turned. "Mel." "I'm 80 years old," he said. "Don't say what you're about to say." His voice was dry and unhurried. "My grandson is in Helena. Works at the territorial office. Clerk position. Been there 4 years. He knows Commissioner Aldridge's assistant personally." He looked at the envelope in Clara's hand. "You give me that paper, and I'll have it on the right desk before Hale's man gets within 10 miles of the building." "It's 2 days of hard riding," Ethan said carefully. "I've done harder." Mel looked at him with the expression of a man who has outlasted many people's expectations. "And I've got less to lose on the road than any of you do here." He nodded toward the cabin,
where through the window they could see the shapes of the two girls moving. You're needed here, I'm needed there. That's the logic of it. Clara looked at Ethan. Ethan looked at Mel. You ride tonight, Ethan said. Right now, before Briggs comes back. I know that. Mel held out his hand. Clara looked at the envelope one more time. Then she put it in his hand. Mel Sutter tucked it inside his coat, buttoned it, patted the pocket once, took his horse's reins. I'll send word when it's done. He swung up into the saddle with the ease of a man who had been getting on horses for 7 decades, looked down at Clara and said, Your husband would have done the same thing, you know. He'd have been right here. Then he turned his mare north and rode without looking back. Clara watched him go and felt something in her throat that she didn't have a name for. Gratitude and grief and something else. Something that felt like being part of something bigger than herself. All right, she said. She turned around. We need to talk about tonight. They pulled the ranchers back together at the Whitmore Ranch by 7. Martin Harrison and Jean-Pierre Delacroix and Bill Patterson and Henry Adder and Tom Harrison, 17 years old, with his jaw set and his rifle cleaned. Ellen Patterson had ridden out too, and Clara had stopped arguing about that. They had 11 people. Briggs had 12 riders. Those were not good numbers for a frontal confrontation, and Clara knew it and said so plainly, because there was no time for anything but plainness. We don't fight them in the open, Ethan said. He was standing at the kitchen table with the rough map he'd sketched out. The road in, the barn position, the tree line to the east. We make this terrain work against them. They'll come in expecting us spread out and frightened. We give them the opposite. You're talking about an ambush, Bill Patterson said. I'm talking about a prepared defense. Ethan looked up. There's a difference. We're not going to fire first. We're going to make the cost of firing first so high that they stop. And if they don't stop? The table was quiet for a moment. Then we don't miss, Ethan said. Henry Adder let out a slow breath. He was sitting with both hands flat on the table, and his face had the look of a man who had made his decision and was done renegotiating it with himself. Tell me where you want me, he said. They worked it out in 40 minutes. Positions, signals, what each person did if Briggs's riders split. Clara listened and contributed and corrected twice, because there were 2 things about that road approach that Ethan didn't know, and she did. He took the corrections without argument, adjusted the plan, moved on. Tom Harrison was given the tree line east of the barn. He started to protest. He wanted to be on the road, the main position. And Martin Harrison put a hand on the shoulder and said, East line is the most important position. If they flank us from that side and you're not there, we lose. I need you to hold that because I trust you to hold it. Tom Harrison straightened and stopped arguing. Clara caught Martin's eye. He gave her a small nod. They were ready by 9. Briggs came at 11. They heard the horses when they were still a quarter-mile out. 12 riders don't move quietly, and the summer night carried sound. Ethan was at the front corner of the barn, and he gave the low whistle that was the signal. And Clara felt the line of people around her go still and ready, in a way that had nothing dramatic about it, just a settling, a decision completed. Briggs came through the gate with 10 men visible, and 2 hanging back on the road, and he pulled up when he saw the lights in the house and the shapes on the porch. And Clara could see him reading it, reading the numbers wrong at first in the dark, not understanding yet that there were more people here than he expected. Mrs. Whitmore, he called it from horseback. Last chance. Come out and sign, and this ends clean. Clara stepped forward off the porch, into the yard, alone. Briggs, she said, I want you to look around you real careful.
A pause. She watched him look, watched his eyes adjust, watched him begin to count. "You brought 12 men," Clara said. "I've got 11, and every one of them has been in this valley longer than Victor Hale has been alive." She let that sit for a second. "These are not frightened people, Briggs. These are people who have decided." She heard one of his riders say something low to the man beside him. Briggs's voice stayed even. "Decided people still bleed." "Yes," Clara said. "They do. So do yours." She took one more step forward. "But here's what I need you to think about. Mel Sutter rode for Helena 2 hours ago, with a signed statement from Commissioner Aldridge's own assistant proving the reclassification was purchased. By tomorrow night, that paper is on the territorial governor's desk." She paused. "Victor Hale's legal cover is gone, Briggs. The deeds stand. And Deputy Marshal George Taft is 1 day out with 2 federal deputies." She looked up at him directly. "So you can ride over us tonight. You might even manage it. But you'll do it knowing that by Friday you'll be in federal custody for land fraud, arson, assault, and whatever happens here tonight." The night was very still. One of Briggs's men in the back said, "Cole." Just the name. Just that. Briggs didn't move. His horse shifted under him, sensing something, and he steadied it with his knee. His face was in shadow, but Clara could see the line of his shoulders, and she watched the tension in them change. Not relax, but recalculate. Then a voice came from the dark tree line to the east. Tom Harrison's voice. 17 years old and steady as a rock. "I've got 2 of your men in my sights from here. You want to test whether I'll hold?" Another of Briggs's riders pulled his horse back. Just 1 step. But it was the kind of step that meant something. Briggs looked at Clara one more time, and then Cole Briggs, the most dangerous man Victor Hale employed, the man who had burned the Grayson Ranch and shot a man dead in the streets of Cutter's Creek in front of witnesses, turned his horse around and rode back through the gate. His 12 men followed him out. Nobody in the yard moved until the sound of the hooves was gone entirely. Then Bill Patterson said from somewhere behind her, "Lord Almighty!" And Ellen Patterson said, "Bill, language." And in spite of everything, in spite of the shaking in her hands and the cold sweat on the back of her neck, and the fact that she had come within a coin flip of the worst night of her life, Clara laughed, short and real and surprised out of her. The next 36 hours were the longest of Clara Whitmore's life. They kept the watch in shifts. 2 people on the road approach at all times, the rest sleeping in turns inside the cabin. Nobody went home. The children slept in a pile in Lucy's room. Ethan didn't sleep at all. Or, if he did, it was in increments too short to count. By noon the next day, there was no sign of Briggs. By evening, Martin Harrison rode into town for news and came back with his face unreadable, which scared Clara more than anything that had happened. "Tell me," she said. "Hale dismissed his men this morning," Martin said. "All of them. Paid them out and sent them off his property." He looked at Ethan. "Word came from Helena. Taft's deputies arrived ahead of him. They went to the county records office first thing this morning and seized everything." The yard went quiet. "Reeve?" Ethan said. "In custody. Arrested at the county office while he was apparently trying to destroy files." Martin paused. "And Commissioner Aldridge resigned his post at 8 this morning. Resigned before Mel's paper could be formally filed. But it was filed anyway." Clara sat down on the porch steps. Just sat down, because her legs made the decision before she did. "It's done?" she said. "Taft arrives tomorrow," Ethan said. He was looking at Martin Harrison with the careful expression of someone who needed to hear the rest of it. "But," Martin looked at him. Hale himself hasn't been arrested yet. Taft's working on the warrant. His lawyer is in the way.
Of course he is, Clara said.
But Taft says the warrant is coming. He said. Martin reached into his coat and pulled out a folded note. He held it out to Ethan. He said to give this to you. Ethan read it. His face didn't change much, but something in his posture did. A slight release in the set of his shoulders, something that had been carried for a long time putting itself down.
What does it say? Clara asked.
Ethan looked up.
It says the warrant will be signed by morning. It says the territorial governor's office is involved now, which means Hale can't buy his way out locally.
He folded the note.
And it says Reeve gave a full statement, names, dates, methods, everything.
Henry Adder, who had been standing near the fence, made a sound. Not quite a word. Something that had too much in it for words. Bill Patterson took his hat off and held it in both hands and looked at the ground. George Taft arrived the next morning. He was a compact man in his 40s, with the kind of face that had been weathered into something reliable. And he rode in with 2 deputies, who were younger and had the watchful, easy manner of people accustomed to dangerous situations. He shook Ethan's hand and looked at Clara and said, "You're the widow who held this valley together."
"I had help," Clara said.
"From what I hear, you were the help." He glanced around the assembled ranchers, who had gathered when word came that the marshal was arriving. "We'll need statements from everyone, signed, formal, on the record. It will make the case against Hale airtight, even if his lawyer finds a way to complicate the warrant." He looked at Clara. "Yours first, if you're willing."
"I've been willing for a week,"
Clara said. Victor Hale was arrested that afternoon. Clara wasn't there for it. She heard about it from Martin Harrison, who rode back from town with the details. Hale at his main house, his lawyer present, the warrant read aloud in his own parlor while 3 federal deputies stood at the doors. Hale had said nothing, had simply looked at the warrant with the expression, according to Martin, of a man who had always known this moment existed and had believed until this morning that he could keep it from arriving. He was wrong. Clara stood in her yard when Martin told her and looked out at the valley she had grown up watching. The same wide reach of Montana grass and ridge and summer sky that her husband had loved enough to stake his life on. And she felt the weight of the past weeks in her body like something physical. The sleepless nights, the fear she'd kept behind her teeth, the moment she'd stood in front of Cole Briggs's horse with her hands shaking and her voice steady. She felt James in it too. Everywhere. In the fence posts Ethan had repaired, and the barn door that swung clean, and the cross 40 yards out that she walked to now, alone, and stood in front of for a long, quiet moment. She didn't say anything. She didn't need to. She just stood there and let herself feel the whole of it, the loss, and the fight, and the outcome, and the mourning, and the fact that she was still here, standing on this ground, which was the only thing she had ever asked. Then she walked back to the house. Ethan found her on the porch that evening. Rose and Lucy were inside. Through the window, Clara could hear them, Lucy's voice explaining something with great enthusiasm, Rose's quieter responses, and then both of them laughing at something, a real laugh, uncomplicated and young. Ethan sat down in the chair across from hers, and for a while they just sat, the way people sit when they've been through something together, and the something is finally over, and there's no urgency left to fill the silence. Then he said, "Taft offered me the deputy position back." Clara looked at him. "The one in Wyoming, or a new one up here?" "Territory's expanding," he said. "He needs people he trusts." Ethan looked at his hands. "He said I could bring Rose." "What did you tell him?" I told him I needed to think. Clara was quiet for a moment. She looked out at the darkening field, at the cross, at the wide Montana sky going from orange to red to the first deep blue of evening.
Rose laughed today, she said. I don't mean a small one. I mean a real one. Both of them. In there. She paused. That's the first time I've heard Rose laugh like that since she got here.
I know. His voice was quiet. I heard it too. She needs somewhere to stay, Clara said. Not as a manipulation, just as a fact. Not on the road, not moving. Somewhere she can plant her feet. I know that too. And you? She looked at him directly. What do you need? He turned his head and looked at her. And for once he didn't calculate it, didn't measure what to say. Just looked at her, with all the guardedness down, and she saw what was there, which was something she recognized because she'd seen it in a mirror for the past week. Someone who had been holding everything alone for a long time, and had started, almost without meaning to stop. I don't entirely know yet, he said. Honest, no performance in it. That's all right, Clara said. You've got time to figure it out.
You're not going to ask me to stay. No. She met his eyes. I'm not going to ask. But I'll tell you that I have a ranch that needs 2 pairs of hands, and a daughter who has decided your daughter is her sister without asking either of us, and 3 fence lines that will not survive winter without serious work. She held his gaze. And I'll tell you that the last 10 days have been the first 10 days in a year where I went to bed at night believing this place was going to survive. She paused. That has something to do with you. He looked at her for a long time. Then he said, The deputy position is a 2-year commitment. I know what a deputy position is. I'd need to be away some. I know that too. And Rose would have a home, Clara said simply. Here, with us, for as long as she needs it, whether you're here or away. Something in Ethan Callahan's face broke open and closed again before she could fully read it. But she had seen enough. Clara, he said. Ethan, I think I'd like to stay. She nodded once, looked back out at the valley. He looked out too, both of them watching the last of the light leave the sky and the first stars appear one by one, cold and brilliant and permanent above the Montana plain. Inside the cabin, Lucy said something and Rose laughed again, and this time it went on longer. The summer of 1876 ended the way summers end on the frontier. Not gently, but with a kind of finality. The heat breaking overnight into the first cool breath of what was coming. The grass going gold, the distances sharpening. Victor Hale went to trial in October, and the testimony of 9 ranchers, 2 deputy marshals, and a former county assistant broke his operation apart, piece by piece, over 3 days. Donald Reeve pled guilty and testified against him. The judge, a territorial judge, not the county judge Hale had owned for years, sentenced him to 14 years. Cole Briggs was never tried. He disappeared somewhere between the valley and the Wyoming border and was not found, which was the kind of ending that left an open door in the back of Clara's mind that she kept a watchful eye on. But the deeds stood. The ranches stood. The valley stayed what it had been. A collection of people who had been in this land long enough to have it in their blood. George Taft swore Ethan Callahan in as a deputy marshal on a Tuesday morning in the yard of the Whitmore Ranch, with Rose standing at his side and Lucy standing at Clara's. Both girls serious and straight-backed and almost vibrating with the importance of the moment. When it was done, Lucy leaned up to Clara's ear and whispered, "Does this mean he's staying?" Clara looked at Ethan, who was talking to Taft, and at Rose, who was watching her father with an expression that had something new in it,
something that was not the careful watchfulness of a child on the road, but the quieter, more settled look of a child who has begun, against all expectation, to feel safe. "Yes," Clara said. "He's staying." She put her arm around her daughter's shoulders and held her close, and looked out at the land her husband had built and she had kept, at the repaired fence lines and the sound barn, and the house that had held through everything that had been thrown at it. She had not run. She had not signed. She had not let them take what was hers. And now, standing in the summer's last gold on the land that belonged to her and to James's memory and to every ounce of stubborn love she had poured into it, she understood that some things in this world were simply not for the taking, not by force, not by paperwork, not by any man who mistook a woman's quiet for surrender. This was her land. It would stay that way. And that was the end of it. And also the beginning.